Dave Smith likes to talk about morality, likes to talk about the ethics of war, but when it comes to morality in his way of looking at it, it is truly what Ayn Rand, I think, would call frozen abstraction. Is basically he does talk about morality, he does talk about what's moral, but the way he uses it is completely devoid of any sort of agency on the part of Palestinians, any sort of agency for anybody for that matter, any sort of free will, any sort of volition when it comes to taking certain actions, as well as completely separating the government from the people they govern, the people they have the consent of, and the people they are taking care of. Today, we'll be going through a few clips of Dave Smith's appearance on Piers Morgan, where they talked a little bit about the conversation they had with Douglas Murray, but also a few more observations. Joining me today is James Valiant, and I would like to go to you, James, but I think we should try to get through. We don't have that many clips, but let's already start with the first one, and then we can talk. So, clip number one.
It seems to me that there's every account on Twitter with an Israeli flag and a Hebrew name in their bio certainly seem to think that I got my ass kicked. What I think what's even more fascinating is that there'd be specific moments that people draw 180-degree opposite conclusions from. Like the one that I saw going super viral is him, asking me if I've ever been to Israel, and then kind of putting on a performance about how shocked he is that I haven't been there. And it was interesting to me how different people could look at the exact same moment, and one group of people could say, oh, this was Dave getting destroyed. And the other group of people could say, I mean, like, objectively, this is a non-argument. This doesn't win you any points in a debate. Like, I obviously fall into the second group there, but it certainly does show you how dug in certain people are, of course, which I think is to be expected in this most of contentious issues.
So first, I want to cover the sort of first thing when he said, surprisingly, only the people with Hebrew names and Israeli flags in their bios are sort of think Douglas Murray won, which again, somebody should tell to Dave Smith, just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you cannot be anti-Semitic. And that was absolutely an anti-Semitic point. This idea that only Jewish people can think that Israel was correct in the actions they have been taking, or that Douglas Murray's defense of Israel is proper. I'll go to you, James, but there's also something much more vile that I have been thinking about for last few months especially, and it's the sort of importance of values in sort of somebody's life. And sort of when, the way he said it, Douglas Murray is sort of like performative, sort of being surprised that Dave Smith was not in Israel. But and you could argue about is that a valid point, or is that not a valid point? But Douglas Murray is a journalist for him, and he actually cares about the issues. And as somebody who cares about these issues, and as somebody who is a journalist, he of course goes to the countries he talks about because that's a value to him. And I think his response or his surprise was the fact that somebody who cares about it doesn't actually take any necessary steps towards sort of, and again, doesn't mean that if you care about Israel-Palestinian conflict that you have to go there, but it's sort of, why would you not take steps towards things you care about, which I think really speaks to the Dave Smith's character of basically being a grifter, somebody who just talks about things because they are popular, but doesn't actually care about any of the issues. And if we go through more videos, I think it will be more apparent. But James, I don't think you were on an episode to talk about his original appearance on Joe Rogan. So maybe if you want to comment on that also, but also on this specific clip.
Well, the reason why people are, quote, dug in on the issue is because of their moral values, their moral principles. Sure, there are factual disputes and arguments, but those really pale in comparison to the moral question here. They're looking at, Dave Smith is not looking at things through an objective moral lens at all. He's looking at things through a deontological Kantian moral lens. Intentionally killing civilians is intrinsically wrong as far as he's concerned. This is why he takes the position about World War II he does. Now, none of us were there at World War II, and yet we can have valid opinions about it. And the funny thing is the going to the place to even have a valid opinion about it, obviously Douglas Murray would think that people who accept his journalism when he's been there could have a valid point even if they've not been to Gaza. But the funny thing is that Dave Smith says, what's absolutely hilarious is he says no one's had this debate over whether that was a valid. No, we actually discussed whether it's a valid argument to say you have to go or not. Now, is there a value to going if you're a journalist covering it? Absolutely. Am I going to rely on people who've been there? Absolutely. So it's not as though it's irrelevant. On the other hand, people have discussed the validity of whether or not you have in order to have a valid opinion, you have to have visited there. We had that. I wasn't involved in the discussion, as you pointed out, but that is specifically one thing we took out and dug out. Now, I know lots of people who aren't Jewish who have Israeli flags. I've posted Israeli flags on my social media, and I'm not Jewish. I'm not Jewish at all, even in my ancestry. So to add the gratuitous with a Jewish name is anti-Semitic. Now, I know he's Jewish. Well, that suggests to me he's absolutely blind to, in fact, he's an anti-Semite himself in saying that. Now, as you pointed out, there can be Jewish anti-Semites. Boy, have there been Jewish anti-Semites through the course of history. Karl Marx was a partial Jewish descent. And guess what? He wrote one of the most anti-Semitic diatribes of the 19th century, on the Jewish question. So yeah, Dave, Dave is in effect religious in his approach to war. He is absolutely religious. He's Kantian. He absolutely believes that it's intrinsically wrong to kill civilians, to kill children. And of course, that's sheer nonsense. There are perfectly moral contexts in which you intentionally kill civilians and even intentionally you're going to kill children. Now, is it unfortunate that children get killed? Yeah, but that's the aggressor's. That's on the aggressor. If you use children as shields, then the absolute intentional murderer is the person using the child as an intentional shield. And in this case, Dave drops all context. And we're not only in a war in which the intentional killing of civilians is perfectly moral. Let me just put that in italics. The intentional killing of civilians is perfectly moral in wartime contexts. Now, add to that the fact that Hamas uses their own children as human shields. No, in fact, it's their policy to get their children killed. They want the headline to play on what? Dave Smith morality. Dave Smith, you are the one who is sucked in to the evil of Hamas. You are the one sucked in to perpetuating Hamas because you are actually defending Hamas by saying Israel is killing children, even if Hamas is using their own children as human shields, even if Hamas is seeking the death of their own children in the course of this. Yeah, the power imbalance is clear. If Israel wanted to engage in genocide, there'd be no more Palestinians in Gaza right now. They could have easily wiped out the population of Gaza just using conventional weapons. They did not. They've shown incredible restraint, in fact, too much restraint in my view. And that's the point. He drops the entire factual context. Morality cannot be decided by some Kantian categorical imperative or by some religious commandment from on high, Jesus saying, turn the other cheek. That does not decide questions of morality in war. What you're doing is you're trotting out a bad intrinsicist morality. And that's what Dave Smith did throughout the whole thing. And you have him there with Piers Morgan. These are two deeply morally confused people who think they're moral, who present it as morality. They're not. They are going to perpetuate October 7th. They're going to perpetuate Hamas. They are the ones with their mistaken view of morality, guised at, mind you, they dress it up. The window dressing is, we're the moral ones because we oppose the killing of children and going, to quote, too far in war. Oh, that's absurd. And he gives the whole show away when he talks about, for example, World War II. No, none of us were around.
Yeah, well, with
Yeah.
that World War II example is in a third clip. So before
Oh,
we
okay.
move on to that, let's check out the second clip. But before that, thank you, PC, for your super chat saying he is woke. I mean, that is something Douglas Murray talked about on Joe Rogan's this sort of new woke right that embraces conspiracism and embraces a lot of sort of things we've seen on the woke left. We also have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. A super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. He says James is gold, definitely. And a super chat from PC again. Thank you so much. He says James, he is just one more hater. Sad. So many out there. Well, let's listen to him a bit more with the second clip.
Is that war? Yes, look, there's been the Geneva Convention, there's international humanitarian law. It goes back to the mid 19th century, was codified into law after World War II. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a step in the right direction. But this is all a politician or a group of politicians declaring a word, and the fact that there are lines drawn on a map does not in any way magically transform morality or the basic philosophical concept of intent. And even in your example there, if I were to give out pamphlets, give out a warning, tell everybody I'd really like you to leave, and then they didn't, and I blew up a building, we would consider that intentional murder. Now, my point, I think a lot of times people object to almost what the implications of this way of looking at the world might be, but forget all of that for a second.
Well, Dave Smith definitely forgets about a lot of things. Definitely, libertarian arguing for international law was not on my 2025 bingo card. I mean, again, this complete, and again, even saying international law was codified into law. I mean, when you hate government so much as Dave Smith does with his sort of branch of anarchism, that he sort of says, any sort of like lines on the map, or national borders are sort of arbitrary. Him trying to compare this to sort of any to sort of like a local action, and that would be ridiculous. Which again, it wouldn't be ridiculous when a policeman tells you, "Hey, you are getting arrested. Get on the ground." You understand that if you don't get on the ground, force will be acted upon you in sort of a proportion. You might not immediately get killed, but sort of in proportion to he might force you on the ground, or he might force you to arrest. We all understand that, and we all agree with that, besides some crazy anarchists, because we understand that for a society to function, there needs to be one sort of organization, the government, that has the sort of the ending say when it comes to the enactment of force. Because once you start dealing with force among any people, then that's a constant civil war. So there needs to be one decider that gets the end say, and we all agree upon that. And again, him sort of like trying to invoke international law is simply ridiculous. And again, this is what war is. Hamas has started a war. Israel is responding in kind. That's why you don't start war, because it is this rejection of civilization. And Dave Smith is trying to do this civility when it comes to war, which again stands from his anarchism. I mean, his whole idea is that you can have sort of a market in force, is that you could have this just dealing with people by force, and somehow it's not a complete disaster, it's not a complete eradication of society.
Yeah, I mean, we have a concept in the U.S. called suicide by cop, and Dave Smith is in effect saying that no matter what kind of provocation, and now we are individualizing it, and war involves groups of people, nations, organizations. But as you point out, let's focus on that for a minute. If a person is not obeying the cop's orders with a gun pointed at him, and it appears to be a deadly threat, maybe a deadly threat not only to the cop but to civilians around, the cop is perfectly justified in killing the person, and it is not murder. It is absolutely not murder. Now, broadening it out, or take a hostage situation. The SWAT team comes into a building where hostages are taken. They realize that there's this nuclear device that's in there. Let's make a fantasy example, but they're using humans as a shield. Would the SWAT team coming in the face of, maybe let's make it not nuclear, let's make it an explosive that'll take out the next two blocks, do they have a right to shoot if the human shield that's being put in the way of stopping this button that would kill thousands of people? They absolutely do, and it is not murder. In fact, the concept of murder is inapplicable in war. Full stop. Look, it doesn't matter to me whether Nazi soldiers were themselves being threatened. Let's say the Nazi soldier on the front line has a family back home that's being held hostage by the Nazis and saying, you either fight for our side or we kill your family. And based with this context that destroys the concept, you see, of rights respecting. Okay, the only reason why I was a Nazi soldier fighting the British in World War II was because they had my family hostage. I don't care. You shoot the soldier. You may have created a wonderful moral argument for why he's fighting for the Nazis. That's utterly irrelevant. So what he does is he drops any factual context for the application of morality, the concept of murder, for example. So in war, the concept of murder is absolutely inapplicable. You kill whatever agents are helping and I don't care what their moral status is. Let me just repeat that. It does not matter what the moral status is if they are part of the Nazi war machine, if they are part of even assisting them, if they sew their uniforms, if they're helping an industry peacefully behind the scenes. I don't care. You know something? They could even be resistors to Nazism. Does that prevent the Allies from bombing them if they're right there in the way? No. Now, does that mean we don't have any rules of warfare? No, we have rules about our own soldiers' conduct for our own purposes. But one thing that I do know is that the concept of murder is absolutely to reject morality when it comes to war. So you can't cite the Geneva Convention and what you would say would be morality in a context where that morality simply no longer applies. In fact, the morality of self-defense is what you have to look at, and you have to look at it in the context of this is a big group, this is an organization. We don't have jurisdiction over it. Once Israel had left Gaza, and they thought, boy, land would buy them peace. Wrong. Wrong. As you say, it divorces all moral agency. Palestinians picked Hamas as their government, among other groups that were nearly as bad or worse. They picked Hamas. So they, whether they're innocent, whether they're children, whatever it is, they have subjected all of the people under their rule to being killed. And it's not murder. Full stop. Murder is inapplicable to war. Soldiers on either side really are not guilty of murder. They're not. The concept is divorced from the context in which it is applicable altogether.
We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says, few in Gaza are innocent. Somebody, I think, in the chat said there is such a concept of just war, and it's a wrong concept. Of course, the idea that you could fight sort of a just war again is devoid. Like we have to move on to the last thing. So people will have to. We have thousands of videos on our channel. Look up Ayn Rand Center UK Just War, and I'm sure you'll be able to.
Just war theory is unjust. Okay, there's the thumbnail on that.
Let's go to the last clip.
First of all, just on the specifics, and we have talked about this before, but I tend to agree with five-star General Dwight D. Eisenhower that it was unnecessary and wrong for us to drop the nuclear weapons. But regardless of that, even if five-star General Eisenhower is wrong about that, and the other generals who supported it were right, this is exactly the point, Piers, is that when you start to think about war for what it actually is, what the overwhelming onus becomes clear. And the onus is on you to demonstrate that we absolutely have to do this. That the standard for war, when you're talking about intentionally killing innocent civilians, the standard ought to be, the burden should always be on you to demonstrate that we absolutely have to do this. I know this is horrible. I know what the result of this is, but that we have to do this because so much more human suffering would come from us not doing this. And this is, to me, the essence of the point of why I talk about war in this way, is that because if you don't think about it this way, it ends up being very easy to find other justifications, justifications like Hamas must go. Hamas must go. It's like, whoa, hold on, wait a second. I kind of think Hamas must go. I kind of think the Likud party must go. I definitely think Kim Jong-un must go. I kind of think Vladimir Putin must go. But that's not the standard for whether or not we're justified to just start slaughtering innocent people in the hope of achieving that end.
Sorry, what was that, Dave Smith? 5-star general? Oh, you mean like, no, like having people, experts in a situation on specific things.
We're very well caught. So he complains about this argument from authority.
I just want to finish with a bit more things, then I'll give it to you. And he mentioned this twice. 5-star general said, you have a different kind of information after the war. Yeah, you and again, even the idea that would be again, and dropping the nuclear bombs wasn't sort of a unique thing, but I don't want to talk about the sort of these specifics. Now he says that onus when fighting a war is on the person fighting a war. Why? Why is there not an onus on the other side to not start the war?
Corrupt. That's morally corrupt. You use force as strongly as possible, and in fact, saying you put the onus on. No, once you've started once the aggressor started a war, the other side can kill as many of you as possible, as quickly as possible, to end the war. If there is a morality to war, it's to use such overwhelming force and to make their side, their population, suffer to such a degree that they unilaterally surrender. The morality of war is to compel unilateral surrender. Now, unfortunately, Israel has not understood this, nor has America understood this. And so we say we care about collateral damage. Way back when we were doing the Iraq war, for example, everyone was saying, oh, well, we have to do everything we can to reduce collateral damage. No, we do not. That is to apply the morality of your local police force to the morality of warfare. There's a radically different procedure. When there is, for example, I'll again use the law enforcement example, when there is a local case where, say, there's a bank robbery in progress, the police should be concerned about civilians and civilian innocent people being killed. In warfare, that context is dropped altogether. We do not have control over the territory. We do not have control over the jurisdiction. Everything behind enemy lines is your enemy, Once Hamas has started doing warfare, in fact, way back when Hamas took over Gaza, almost 20 years ago, when Hamas took over Gaza and they started lobbing the first rocket against Israel, everyone in Gaza was now subject to being killed in order to prevent the war from going on, lasting almost 20 years now. Had they had the correct morality of warfare, that is to say, punish them, punish their population, punish anyone within their jurisdiction under their rule until they unilaterally surrender as quickly as possible, and the surrender as unilateral as possible. That is the morality of war. The morality of war, and Eisenhower, of course, was deeply morally confused, as you could see, frankly, in my view, even way back in World War II. You could see that the man's Christianity was getting in the way of his own thinking. And it would not matter to me. I can make the argument, and everyone has made the argument, for example, the dropping of the bomb. After the Battle of Okinawa, we could see that the casualties on both sides were horrific.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off because we need to start wrapping up. And again, people can look up. We talked also about the surrender of Japan, where we've covered what it took. So people can, again, go on the channel, look up Japan, Ayn Rand Center UK, and you'll be able to find about that. But there is just one more point that I'll wrap up and then I'll go to you, is this rejection of any sort of agency when it comes to Palestinians, when it comes to any evil people. This idea that, you don't have a sort of right to sort of do attack sort of like innocent people. Again, any population is complicit in what its government is doing and will suffer for it, and that's why it needs to. The Palestinians should have stood up to Hamas if they didn't want for this to happen. They knew this was going to happen. Everybody knew Hamas was going to attack Israel at some point. and it happened in the past. So we even know, even this population itself from 10 years ago, Operation I think Protective Edge, we knew exactly what was going to happen, and that was on a smaller scale. Palestinians could have decided to do something different. They rejected modernity. They rejected doing something different. They wanted to continue with Hamas. With that, we have the reality show coming up. James, any last thoughts?
Well, no, it's just that Dave Smith dresses up a fully evil argument in the clothes of morality. He calls it moral, he calls it ethics, when it is, in fact, the perpetuation of dictatorship and war. So he's got it exactly backwards. What he's arguing is for true evil, and true evil is to submit to dictatorship and aggression. And that's what he's calling for. He's an intrinsicist. He's a Kantian Christian sort of moral person. And so he can dress up the most evil of arguments as if it were morality. That's my summary.
And that's why when he talks about morality, while he can say it's when you understand what morality is really about, you understand that he's full of shit. So we'll finish with that.
Yes.
And we have the reality show coming up. It's going to be a special episode because it's going to be live, meaning it's going to be not live in sort of we are here live, but sort of it's going to be from a location. So make sure to join. They're going to be talking about debunking the Nakba. Link for that is in the chat, starting in just a few minutes or so. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And bye-bye. And it's in front of live audience, which Razi says. So
Can't miss
make sure
that.
to tune in.
Be safe.